All right, so hi, thank you very much, Angela, for that great introduction. And I mean, I wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for all those different sources of funding. So this is kind of nice to be able to share some of the results um, on the Enniscrone Castle Community Heritage Project. So my name is Frank Hall. I am currently finishing up my doctorate in archaeology at the University of Galway under the supervision of Dr. Kieran O'Connor. Um, and my specialty is strong houses and fortified houses. So essentially late castles, the end of castle construction in Ireland and kind of that transition into Renaissance influenced estate houses that are built in that kind of late 16th, early 17th century period. So just before I get started on some of the details there, as Angela was saying, this wouldn't be possible without many hands in the pot. So a lot of thanks to the Heritage Council for their funding. As well as thanks to Angela, to everyone who kind of helped on site, from local historians Michael Breen, Patty Tuffy, Tommy Foodie. I saw Patty was here. So just thank you for everyone for their input. I'm, as you can tell by my accent, I'm not a local to the area. So it really isn't, it's with the help of locals and people who know these monuments and care about these monuments that I get a lot of the information to kind of start my research. And thanks as well to Dr. Paul Masons, who carried out the aerial survey that I'm going to go into a bit in this, and to Philip Armstrong, who we've been consulting with for quite a while to basically create an idea of what this building would have looked like while it was in use. Thanks as well to Edelbert and Garney Keller for helping me out on site, and to Kieran O'Connor and Rory Sherlock for their input as I've been working on Enniscrone and their supervision over the last couple of years. So what am I going to go into today? Essentially, I'm going to look at a few different bits and pieces today, but really I'm just going to focus on Enniscrone Castle itself. So in broad strokes, the talk's going to be broken up into kind of 5 separate points here. Brief introduction as to where exactly in the landscape is Enniscrone Castle, what are some of the features that surround it, and how can it be situated. And then we'll go a bit into the historical background, kind of look at what this building was used for, was there any other occupation on the site, and how would it have been used, and who would have lived there. And then I'll get really into the research that we did on the site here. So the architectural survey and the aerial survey, getting a better idea of the standing remains on the site in order to inform an idea of how it may have looked. And it's really through the combination of all 4 of those aspects, the citing this historical background, architecture, and aerial survey, that we're really able to kind of interpret and make conclusions on the results of everything here. So, getting right on into it with with the landscape setting of the site here. So Enniscrone Castle, as you can see, is built on a very high rise in the ground. You can see it in the picture on the left-hand side of your screen there. You see it kind of popping up on the rise on a low esker that's rising out towards Killala Bay and Enniscrone Village. It's overlooking Valentine's Church that you can see on the bottom there. See, it's listed as St. Valentine's Church on that drawing. That's an error. It's just Valentine's Church. And I'll get into that in a moment. As well as a highlight you'll see of a possible trackway. And that was really kind of clear from some of the aerial survey results that we were able to glean as we carried out research on the site. One of the most dominant features of the landscape, though, is Killala Bay in the distance there. And you can see it in the rear of this photo. This is one of the drone survey photos that was taken in production of a 3D model of the building. I'll show a few different screen grabs of that 3D model later on in the talk. But you can really kind of get an idea here of just how dominant Enniscrone Castle is within the landscape itself. And really you can see just how high that rise is there. You can see it dips down to the left, to the south there, as well as kind of rides away. You can see some of the possible prehistoric megalithic structures, megalithic tombs in the distance there as well, kind of to the top right of the screen there. So what exactly is present within the landscape? So we had as you can see on the screen here, we have the results of some of the aerial survey conducted by Paul Masons, a Western Aerial Survey, and clearly showing the surrounding topography of the site. These results were gained using a DJI Enterprise Matrix drone, 300 RTK. I don't know the specifics on that, so you'd have to ask Paul in particular the details of all the minutia on that one. It's a bit too technical in terms of the aerial stuff. I'm better with stuff on the ground. But essentially what we have is we have two composite images here. And the image on the right, the digital surface model, is actually compiled from the orthostatic imagery mosaic that is on the left there. That's basically done at flying a drone over a set pattern and creating a mosaic of mosaic tiles to create an idea of exactly where each and every frame of photography is taken and compiling it all together. So essentially it's a photogrammetric model that's then used to create that digital surface model on the right. So what are a few of the details here? And this is just kind of a zoomed in idea on the south end of that. And you can see a few of our key monuments that are present within the site. Focusing on the first two here, you can see where Enniscrone Castle and Valentine's Church are located. And you can see that rise really kind of clearly showing up, continuing across the entirety of the site here. You can see this rise as it goes straight across that esker all the way there. A few of the other associated monuments, you'll see there's two ring forts present within the immediate surrounds, one to the northeast of the site and another one to the southwest. There's a possibility that these ring forts would have been occupied at the time of time of the building of Enniscrone Castle, but that's not necessarily confirmed, nor do we have any historical reference to them. We do know that other ring forts are occupied up through the 16th century, so it's definitely not uncommon for them to be occupied at that time. If you've got an effective structure, why not continue to use it at that point? However, would they have been in their heyday? Most likely not. And lastly, you can see there's two megalithic tombs, or possible megalithic tombs, situated to the west of the site there as well. And they kind of give this idea that, and we can clearly see that Enniscrone is used effectively throughout a large swath of time, going back thousands of years. And you can see this progression as we go all the way from those megalithic tombs up to Valentine's Church, which we know was damaged during the 1798 rebellion, that it's really kind of in occupation for quite a long time and really kind of an important center. So let's look at some of that historical background. This is just the historical background of the castle itself. I'm not going to go too much into all this other stuff because it's kind of beyond the scope of this particular project. There's a few different sources that we can find our way working through. The analytic sources were quite helpful in terms of determining a few of the different references to the castle itself, particularly from the 15th through the 17th centuries. The Great Book of Lecan is also clearly mentions the castle, and in fact, it provides us with our first mention of the castle site. But really, we can't just use those historical sources and documentary sources on their own. The cartographic sources, particularly the maps created by John Brown I and John Brown II during Richard Bingham's campaign to map Connaught in the late 16th century, as well as more modern investigation and surveys of the site, including the ordnance first edition Ordnance Survey maps and Ordnance Survey done in the 1830s, as well as Wakeman's drawing, which you can see I'll come back to, but it was just on that previous slide right there. And finally, with some more modern surveys, including probably the first truly detailed plan of the site carried out by D.M. Waterman in 1961, which really kind of provided a basis for every survey that's taken place since, including my own. So I mentioned that first reference we have. And really the main thing that we want to see here, we see Enniscrone mentioned as in a few different ways throughout time. Here we see it in the second line as being an oak-cleaving site. The bright streams, a flowery bright-sided as the wave fort of the splendid lime doors. And those splendid lime doors really being one of the first instances that we have of any sort of architectural reference. And really, until the destruction of that first castle on Enniscrone site, we really don't have any other references to the actual structure itself. So at Enniscrone, we have two different castles that are in existence over time. What we currently see on the site today is the second of those two castles. This first castle, we don't have a specific date as to exactly when it was built, and this is the first mention of it. We know it was occupied in 1417 by the O'Dowd lords. Tigre O'Dowd being the chieftain in 1417, and it was for his inauguration this poem was composed by the McFurbished family. We see this reference to the splendid lime doors, and when kind of looking at some of those historical references, we can take certain aspects of that. Well, whether or not there were lime doors per se may not have been the case. However, lime doors could simply be in reference to the lime and aggregate render, which we refer to as harling, that would have gone on the exterior of the castle. So kind of a whitewashed plaster look to the outside of the castle itself. That would have been done for weatherproofing, especially in the later medieval period. We have references of that same Tigre Balcodauda being present and on the site and dying at Enniscrone in 1432 after a reign of 15 years. And during his reign, he had, quote, restored the hereditary possessions in this territory to their lawful proprietors, both lay and ecclesiastical, and had maintained a respect for the learned men and poets. He was very much respected within the local lordship of the Dauda chiefs. We know that that lordship continued to use Enniscrone throughout the time period, throughout the 15th century. We see at least two of Tygo Dowd's successors following on. John Glass, whose lordship would have begun in about 1457, and Donica Olta, his lordship would have started somewhere in the 1490s. Whether or not it's 1498, it could have been as early as 1483, as there's a few different discrepancies in the historical sources. Donica there, he may have actually built Cottlestown Castle, which is another O'Dowda castle and pictured on your screen right there. So we know he was definitely using these fortresses and these fortified houses and strong houses effectively. They're both listed as having died at Enniscrone near the Moy, and they're mentioned repeatedly throughout several different sources. So we know who's living there. The question is then, what exactly is happening on the site? And we know that that earlier castle is destroyed in and about 1512. That's mentioned in the Annals of the Four Masters, the Annals of Connaught, the Annals of Lochee, and the Annals of Ulster. All four of them mention this, likely derived from the Annals of the Four Masters source. And I won't bother reading this entire thing to you. It's not necessarily important. But one of the biggest things to keep in mind here is that we have this as a site of conflict between the O'Donnells and the Burkes. So the Great War that broke out in 1512 between O'Donnell and O'Neill. There's another war that broke out between O'Donnell and MacWilliam Burke. So the second battle the second war that really Enniscrone took the play into. We know that MacWilliam Burke entered into Tireret, where Enniscrone is located, and placed provisions and warders at the castle of Escaroon, which is likely and suggested by O'Donovan to have been Enniscrone, having previously taken that castle from its hereditary possessors, to whom O'Donnell had some time before giving it up. Those hereditary possessors likely being the O'Cleves, the Kavanaghs or the Keeves, that were residing at the site there and kind of retaining it for the O'Dowd lordship that would have been their overlords. We see that the castle is then taken again, and not only is it taken, it is destroyed. So we see the O'Donnell, having returned with his army, laid siege to the castle at Escaroon, wherein the son of MacWilliam was. And after 4 days' great labor, they took the castle, and O'Donnell gave protection and guarantee to the warders. He took the son of MacWilliam prisoner, detained him as a hostage, and then ordered that the castle should be placed upon post, and it was tumbled to the earth, after which he returned home with victory and triumph. So not only do we have a record of the castle being destroyed, we know exactly how it was destroyed. Likely they would have removed some of the lower stones, placed them on posts, and essentially used horsepower to pull down the walls of the castle itself. So we know that the earlier castle is destroyed in 1512, but what we don't know exactly is when the castle that we currently see is built. There's a lot of different architectural influences that tie it into a few different exact time periods, but there's a few different historical references that may hint at when it was built. One recommendation given by Conor McHale there is that Richard Albanock, mentioned by Conor McHale, rather not given by, is that Richard Albanock, also known as Richard Birmingham, may have built the castle. That reference likely is in regards to the earlier castle, if it is true at all. But again, the first confirmed reference we have to the site is in 1417. There's also reference to an Albanoch Moor, the big Scotsman, also known as Randall Moore MacDonald. Randall Moore, he would have married an O'Dowda, the widow of an O'Dowda chieftain. And we know that he died in the Battle of Shrule in County Mayo in 1570. So if he were to have constructed the later castle, he would have had to do so at some point before 1570. And it's not entirely unfitting with that exact time frame, though I'd suggest it likely was built at some point slightly after 1570 based on stylistic differences there. There's a possible reference to it having been built in 1560 by the McFurbish family, which would have supplied the hereditary poets and historiographers to the O'Dowda lordship. And we mentioned the first poem from the Great Book of Leckham would have been composed by the McFurbish family. However, the reference to the castle being constructed in 1560 very well could have been the actual construction of Lecan Castle, which is really one of three O'Dowd castles in the parish of Kilglass, the other being at Polchini there. And the last reference being to Conor Rua O'Dowda, who had taken side against the O'Connors against the O'Donnell. Though it's not his actual construction of the castle isn't listed in historical sources again, mentioned by Conor McKell there. So we have a few different ideas as to when it could have been built, but nothing really firmly giving us a date. We know at some point after 1512 the castle is rebuilt, and we know the O'Quevians are still occupying it there. We know O'Donnell gave it back to the O'Quevians. So if we don't have a starting date, do we have an end date? Well, there's been some suggestions that the castle could have been built in the 1600s. I would like to point out the mapping of Sligo done during the campaign of Sir Richard Bingham. And this is where the cartographic sources really kind of help us out. This first map here was conducted in 1589, possibly by John Brown I, though we don't actually know exactly who the cartographer was who actually did this specific map. We know there's a couple errors on the drawing or on the map itself, and to the point that it actually had to be redone in 1591 by John Brown II. And I'll show that map in just a moment. But one of the key bits that we actually have here is that in 1589, we actually have reference to Enniscrone marked here on the actual site itself. And you can see right here, this lovely little bit that's showing up in Enniscrone there. So we know we have reference to a castle that's actually showing. You can see the tower that's actually shown up on the site there as well as another a sort of building attached to it. Very much kind of the style of reference to castles in the nearby area. We see another one, Kilbass, and a few other castles that really show up at the point there. So we know in 1589 there's a castle on the site based on the cartographic sources. So even though we have no reference to a specific castle being rebuilt after 1512, we know it is in existence by 1589. So at the very least, we have a no later that date on the building of the castle. And stylistically, I think very much it would date to the 1570s, 1580s, based on a few different aspects here. Now, it would have also been converted, and I'll get into those as we go into the architectural survey. This is that 1591 map. This is the more specific one. And again, you see this idea, Enniscrone showing there, or Enniscrone, again showing Enniscrone on the site. And in this case, there isn't actually a castle referenced on it, but we do know that almost every other town that's actually listed there does include a castle. So we know at the very least that there is a castle marked there in 1591 that's just not included on the second map, of the redo of the map. So it's very likely that we have the actual situation of the building itself. So what happens to the castle after that? Well, now that we have it solidly there, we know in 1597 it's sold by two of the Dowd men, two brothers to John Crofton, who was then Exchequer General of Ireland. Crofton in turn sold it on to Thomas Nolan of Ballinrobe, and his son John Nolan was residing in the castle at the time of the Irish Rebellion in 1641. He was listed as having been in residence there in the Down Survey. In 1642, we know the site is the castle is the site of a skirmish between the Dowds and Nolan. And we know the castle is then retaken. So during that skirmish, we actually have a good description during the actual depositions of the O'Dowds. So we have this idea that Nolan was actually not present at the site, but that his wife was. And the actual description of having out the castle taken is that after this, he went with his father, Charles Dowd, Mr. David Dowd, and about 40 men with some arms to the house of Mr. John Nolan at Enniscrone. He pushed open said Nolan's doors and entered into his said house, he being then in England, and his wife then in bed, it being about 9 or 10 o'clock, and said Mr. Nolan's wife was put out of doors and his father kept possession of the goods and Master David Dowd of the house. So we actually have this historical reference of how in the court records of the depositions describing exactly how it was taken. So John Nolan wasn't at home, he was in England, but his wife was, and they threw her out of the house, took possession of it, and held on to it. And they held on to it for the next 10 months until Sir Charles Coote, who the Dowds were actually in the employ of in the first place, came back and took it in 1642. So why do we know it's taken here? Well, the suggestion is that it's one of the few cases where we actually have a family going in and just taking it back because it used to belong to them. It was one of that's really the suggestion is the only rationale that was given by the Dowds at the time. It was like, well, we used to have this castle in the 1590s. We'd like it back. Came in, took it, held on to it for a little while. And we know there is a little bit more violence that actually took place on the site. A few different loyalist settlers coming through and parliamentarian settlers fighting all throughout the entire way. So shortly after taking the castle, we know there was a man, Hene, who was coming via Enniscrone from Ardnaglass to Sligo with a group of loyalist settlers, and the Dowds garrisoned the castle, threatened and harassed them, killing a Scotsman in the convoy and wounding his wife. This is just the day after the actual taking of the castle. So that's recorded in the depositions of having taken place the day after it was taken. So whether or not they were in any connection to them, it's a little bit unclear. We know the castle in the 1640s remained in government possession and really didn't play much of a role throughout the rest of the war, other than there was a garrison placed there in 1646. There's no mention of any involvement they may have had at that point. And the last mention of the castle historically is that it was in the possession of Sir Francis Gore in 1607. And it's mentioned there that the castle and the land surrounding it were fertile. There was numerous goods on it. But really, that's the last mention we have of the site itself. Up until the Ordnance Survey. So looking into some of the more modern surveys that are carried out, this gives us an idea of the actual building as it stands today. And the first bit that we can look at right here is Enniscrone Castle, as you can see on the top left there, or right in the middle there, with showing 4 towers. So this is the 1830 survey, and John O'Donovan, who carried out the Ordnance Survey, gave us a nice clear drawing in the name book as well, actually showing the 4 towers of the castle. However, this has been included to show that the 4 towers would have been standing in the 1830s. That doesn't seem to have been the case. So during the course of doing research for this survey, went through the name book, and it's actually mentioned by O'Donovan there that the part marked with the dotted line is not standing, but has been carried away for building, while the other part, with the exception of the roof, is entire. So really, you can see that dotted line on the left-hand side, that being the east side of the building. That's the same side of the building that isn't standing today. So it's very possible that by the 1830s, this building may have been in very much the same state as it is today. There is possibility that there would have been more works ground to the footprint, visible to the footprint that would have been visible. But we know that some of the other windows that are actually present on the site aren't actually included in this plan either. So take all of that with just a tiny bit of a grain of salt there. A lot of the references that O'Donovan gave were given to him by locals at the time, as well as by a little bit of folklore that would have tied into it. He actually mentions that the castle was taken from a man by the name of Ormsby, who was there, who was fleeing the site when it was taken, but saw that somebody was stealing a book and actually came back to kill the man who was stealing his book before fleeing on horse. So we have a few different historical references that pop up there. But there's no historical mention of anyone named Ormsby ever owning the castle, so take it all with a grain of salt as it goes there. The first real kind of clear idea that we get of the castle after that is the drawing done by William Frederick Wakeman, who would have been He studied under George Petrie and created numerous pen and pencil sketches of monuments throughout Ireland in the late 19th century. This drawing in particular was done in 1879 and shows the castle in very much a similar state to the way we see it today, with the exception of one key bit, and that's the vegetation. We get a clear view of the castle here. There's really no trees around it. And you also have this nice clear view of Valentine's Church to the south of the building as well. That clear rise is very visible there, and this will be taken pretty much right down from where the recycling center and the family resource center is in Enniscrone today. Which takes us then to the Waterman survey. And this is really kind of the last survey that's done on the site in detail. So in 1961, D.M. Waterman is doing a survey of 17th century Irish houses in hopes of finding the architectural ancestry, and he creates this plan that you can see on the right-hand side of the screen here. He notes that there's a lot of similarities to Ballinafad elsewhere in Sligo. Ballinafad with slightly thicker buildings, and that building being built, or thicker walls, that as it was built as a fort, created a slightly more fortified example. And we know that this building is then the plan that is used by both Salter in his surveys in 2004, as well as by Markley in 2002. So we see this idea that this really creates one of the first ones here. And upon doing my own architectural plan of the site, which I'll show in just a moment, this is one of the clearest ones that you get a chance to see. So what do we do on the site? Well, looking at just the architectural survey, I'll go through kind of each of the walls here and just kind of point out a few of the little bits and pieces that we really see present on the site. So looking at the north wall, we can see a few different aspects that were actually included here. One of the key bits is looking at what do we not have. So in the case of the north wall and the interior, we have two post holes that you can see right here, right in the center of the wall here, right above the door. You can also see two holes on the outside of the door, possibly indicating the framing for the exterior of the door as well as the door slot that would have carried on as well on the outside there. So we have a few different little aspects to show here. So those post holes indicating the timber floors that would have carried the first floor level of the building itself. You'll note the windows are relatively small in comparison to other aspects of the building, and even in comparison to the south side of the building itself. Smaller windows, likely timber or stone framed on the outside here. Each of those stones has been robbed away though, so we no longer have them there, and possibly shuttered as well. They likely would have contained glass, and they could have been mullioned. However, because those stones are missing, we actually don't have evidence for the mullions that would have been present on site. Moving on to the south wall, you can see again those joist holes there in the middle of the floor level. So we have this idea again of another timber floor. But one of the biggest differences between the south and north wall is just the size of the windows on the first floor. That being very much in keeping with Renaissance ideals at the time. That the more light you enter into the building, the cleaner it looks. This Renaissance idea of fortified houses and strong houses, that you want to bring in as much light, you want to bring in as much symmetry to the building as possible in keeping with classical ideals, and very much a fashionable idea at the time. At that point, you also have more light coming into them. So these windows, all facing south, would have caught much more of the light during the year, and so we would have had a much better lighting than anything from the north. The lighting from the north wall likely wouldn't have actually allowed much way of light in, but it would have allowed you to see out. We see again larger windows on the first floor level, with a smaller one in the center, and then two more, the edges of them visible from where the wall breaks away on the left-hand side there. You can actually see the bit of where the window exactly goes away. So it gives us an idea of the height and size of the windows on all the levels there. In the western gable, we have more defensive features, with the exception of one window that's showing up on the upper side of the exterior here, the upper left side, right where the corner joist is. That window itself would have allowed for sunlight to come in the evenings. However, it also could have indicated where a doorway or not a doorway, a staircase may have been. There's not exactly a lot of room there for a staircase, but there could have been a timber ladder that window could have provided ways for that light to come through. You can see the fireplaces present in the western gable there, a larger one on ground floor level, including a bread oven, that likely would have been the kitchen fireplace, as well as a smaller one likely for residential use on the first floor level. You can also get an idea of exactly how high it would have gone with a third attic level, second floor attic floor, as well as the roof line there as well, possibly allowing dormer windows on the upper level. But looking at some of the defensive features, we have quite a bit in the corner towers that would have adjoined the western gable. You can see just some of the gun loops that pop up on various levels here. So we have at least 4 gun loops on each floor of each of the surviving towers. So two of the towers there. So even what is just still existing on site, we have 16 gun loops and as many as 32 total gun loops showing up. One of them actually still visible in the western side or the eastern side of the building, which was noted when I was doing my survey on site. And just looking, that window on the right-hand side there is actually one of the best preserved ones here. So looking at how do we recreate these? What do these windows actually look like? Looking at those windows there, that same window that I just circled is the one on the left-hand side here. And you can see that it's very much still in shape. You still actually have both the hood and lintel and sill of the window still intact, in addition to the gun loops that surround it. So you can see one of the gun loops on the right-hand side, as well as that breaking away of the eastern, northeastern tower that you can see actually on the left-hand side there, showing just a few, the remains of one possible gun loop in that wall as well. Looking at the actual sill that's there, you can see these 2 divots in the bottom, as well as again on the top of the window, likely indicating the presence of iron bars that would have been used to close shutters on the window itself. You can see those 2 dimples, about 5 centimeters between them, present on the upper side of several of the other windows in the north tower. But this window is the only one that actually has them present on both top and bottom, giving us a clear idea that they would have continued straight down through the window itself. So all of that was done in order to create an updated plan of the castle itself. So this is the updated plan of the castle. Based on the earlier plans and based on the O'Donovan suggestions, I've included the estimated ground plan of the eastern towers there as well as the eastern gable. If the kitchen fireplace was located in the western gable, which I think very likely that was the kitchen, it's possible that we would have had 2 fireplaces as well on the eastern gable, however, not at ground floor, so at first and second floor level instead, to provide lighting and warmth to the upper floors of the building itself. So that's the architectural idea of the building. What's the aerial survey showing us? And I won't go too much into detail here, but I'll show you just a few of the details as we go around. So this is a digital terrain model. This kind of just gives you an idea of the topography surrounding the site. But one of the most interesting things that we got out of this whole experience was the LiDAR survey. So the LiDAR survey really kind of showing up that surrounding topography of the surrounding landscape really clearly. And you can see here Enniscrone Castle, which I'll zoom in just a moment. You can get a better idea of exactly what is happening surrounding it. So this is just a view of that same LiDAR looking to the northeast, and again, looking to the southeast, but looking kind of exactly in on what we have surrounding the castle itself. Here, you can see this is where the castle footprint is, right on the bottom there, actually showing up the building itself, as well as ring forts to the north and the megalithic tombs to the east, or to the west. Also, as a result of the aerial survey, we were able to create 3D photogrammetric models of the site. And I'm just going to, I'll show, if I have time at the end here, I'll show just kind of an idea of how you can manipulate this 3D model itself. But here's 2 different views of it, as you can see here. PowerPoint, unfortunately, doesn't allow me to actually manipulate it within the presentation itself. So, but it's fully movable, and it's the photogrammetric model of the site itself. So you get a fairly clear idea, not quite as detailed as actually being present on the site for it, but it gives you a really nice idea of reconstructing the building as it stands today. So what do we actually have here? Well, when interpreting interpreting the site, there's a few different things to look at. And one of the biggest things to keep in mind is what you actually can't see on the site itself. So some of the biggest questions I had is simply, number one, for my own research purposes, what is this castle type? Is it a fortified house? Is it a strong house? Does it fit into any other type of architecture that's being built at the time? And based on my conclusions, it's very much in keeping with the idea of strong house architecture in Ireland. Kind of this idea that the focus on the building itself isn't necessarily the showcasing of wealth and power, but more showing the fortification of the site. So the emphasis of the towers, the surrounding and the surrounding groundwork, this presence on a high ground, this high rise, very much shows that defense was a key aspect. And in fact, its use in several different skirmishes shows that it was a necessary defendable site. The other aspects, simply what is invisible. The floors of the building, we can look at the beam holes and know that we have timber partitions, floors that are taking place in the building here. And based on other examples of the type, it's very likely that we would have had an oak and timber roof covered with slates or wood that would have covered the roof itself. Also, what would have happened surrounding the building itself? As you can see in the top right there, the results of the aerial survey show that there is a clear rise surrounding the building itself, highlighted just with that line that I've drawn onto it there. And you can see an image of that, one of those bumps on the bottom left, bottom right of your screen as well. So this idea that if we were to carry out future survey here, one of the things to identify would be to clearly define where is that surrounding architecture in place. Is that a bawn? Is it a timber palisade? What is the actual type of surrounding wall? It very much seems like there is some sort of wall or bank surrounding it. The question is simply of what material would it have been? And that can be done using gradiometry or electrical resistance, as I've done at a few other sites. All of this in working with Philip Armstrong, we've been able to create this clear idea of what the castle may have looked like. And with that, this is what we think Enniscrone Castle may have looked like in its heyday here. So this reconstruction drawing showing exactly how the towers would have been in use. Likely there would have been surrounding architecture taking place. Timber buildings would have fit place, and it really would have been a center of activity and dominating the surrounding landscape. So with that, that's pretty much all I have for you there. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Well, thank you very much, Frank. That was fantastic. That really, really does look brilliant. Um, I was just wondering, please, anybody, if you have any questions, there's you can put one into the chat, or there's the reaction section of Zoom. You can raise a hand, or even just shout out and interrupt if you need to. Just I have a question myself, Frank, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
Was there something that you wanted to say about the trackway in one of our first images?
Oh yes. Actually, you can see it. I'll go back a few slides here because luckily it's not a slide. You can see it fairly clearly in the LiDAR imagery. Yep. Yes. So, and I'll just highlight it here. You can see continuing. This is actually not modern, where it goes here. So, why am I drawing? Not drawing. Laser pointer. That's the one. So you can actually see just to the west of the ring fort, north of the castle there, you can see there's a possible trackway can check there. But that actually can picks up immediately to the west of the castle as well, continuing over the landscape there. That's not a modern trackway. It doesn't show up on any of the Oregon survey maps throughout any point in time. So we know it hasn't been in use for at least the last 200 years. And it's not in use today. So it's very likely that trackway would have actually been a possible routeway that would have connected to the castle itself during its use in the 17th century.
Wow. And that only just came up, that more recent one that you have there, that only just came up in the LiDAR imaging, was it?
Well, I think the LiDAR imaging just showed it more clearly. I know Michael Breen had pointed it out to me in the distance there. So there was definitely suggestions that it may have been present on site here. So that bit at the very top of the screen there, where it's a bit more clearly preserved in the lowlands. And you can see one of the banks of it clearly in the landscape today. But that second bank really, it wasn't clear until you saw the LiDAR and the digital surface modeling. It just kind of gave a really clear idea of exactly where it lined up with.
Okay, that's brilliant. So if anybody has a question there, please fire ahead. No, I have another one myself then if there isn't.
Yeah.
I was just going to ask about the what your plan that you had of the castle itself in the southwest
Mhm.
tower. I think there was just a circular image just just inside the structure itself in the corner. It's probably
Mhm.
something very. I'd seen it on the older plans, just there, yeah, in
Yep.
the southwest
Oh
corner.
yeah.
There's just
So
yeah,
the
just
southwest
that.
corner there, that's a bread oven.
Okay,
So you can still see it in situ in the fireplace today. Um, and there's that line that I've thrown in. It actually seems like there would have been a shelf actually present within the oven itself. So we have one flat slab that's still present there. Now there may have been another slab that would have made the entirety of it flat. If that's the case, the opening would have been quite small though. So it seems like it was almost a terraced effect within the bread oven, just kind of two small shelves that you could throw a couple loaves in. There isn't
inside
great
that
there.
large walk-in fireplace
Yeah,
from the picture, is it?
exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly. So it's just to the left-hand side of the large fireplace there. And I think I have photos of it somewhere, but I
yeah.
didn't throw it into the slot into the PowerPoint here.
I'd seen it. I think I saw it on one of the older plans as well. I was just wondering what it was.
Yeah, it's the Waterman plan in 1961 is the first one that really kind of shows
Okay.
it there.
Is that a
Um,
typical feature?
it's very much in keeping with buildings of the late 15th, or late 16th, early 17th century.
Okay.
So we start to see bread ovens kind of inserted in. One of my other sites is the fortified house at Gort in County Roscommon. And it's a kind of a C planned fortified house where you have a rectangular block and then just two square towers on the top. And actually, the ground floor of one of those towers was used as a kitchen. And we see a really nice example of a bread oven
Wow.
that's actually included at that site.
Wow. That's brilliant. Okay. Well, I don't know if anybody else has another question, please fire ahead there.
I,
Yeah,
I'll
Angela, sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
I'll come in there. Just I think on the illustration, Frank, I know
Mhm.
um from working with you guys on the project, there's been a huge amount of discussion and analysis between yourself and Philip Armstrong around the details on that reconstruction
Oh, yeah.
drawing. And I know there was mostly you'd be confident that it's historically quite accurate. Is that correct? There was, I know there's some elements that you had to put, that were a little bit conjecture, but on the whole, most of the elements you'd be quite confident are quite accurate. Is that correct?
Absolutely, absolutely. So I think the biggest point of conjecture within the entirety of the building itself is that bond wall, um, and not necessarily its presence. I'm fairly confident in saying there would have been a wall surrounding the castle, um, but simply the material, knowing whether or not would it have been stone, timber, or just an earthen bank that would have encompassed the building itself. Um, I think it very likely it would have been stone based on other nearby buildings at the time. Cambo Castle in North Roscommon has a similar type style of bond, I would suggest, as well as Drumdoe on the banks of Loch Arrow. Um, it seems that Cottlestown Castle, which I showed earlier in the presentation, had a surrounding wall. Now a smaller one, maybe not as significant as we're showing here, but with the focus on defense that I'm fairly confident Enniscrone had, it's clear enough that we had a surrounding wall present on the site. Um, the presence of the gatehouse, the presence of any corner towers on that wall, that's purely conjecture. Likely there would have been an opening in the wall. At Drumdoe, we have a nice, clear, small gatehouse that's present there. It's a bit closer to the building itself. But without further study on the site, that would be the only way to confirm whether or not we actually have so any sort of geophysical survey or excavation that would actually confirm whether or not there's a wall there. As for the actual details on the building itself, I think one of the earliest bits that Philip and I kind of had to address was simply the location of the building within the barn. Um, as you know, the castle's up on a high rise, and that wall really kind of comes up to the bit there, and that was informed by the size of the windows on the south side of the building. So just because those windows were so large, it was clear they were used to allow light into the ground floor of the building in particular, as well as the first floor. And if that's the case, they need to get as much of the sunlight as possible. So we needed to make sure that that wall was significantly enough away from the building. So that bump that I showed on the one image is about 4 meters wide. Is that wall on the inside of that bump or the outside of that bump? Where exactly can we situate it? And so best guess, it probably would have been kind of centrally but further located on that bump itself. And then the windows themselves, whether or not they would have been shuttered, whether or not they would have been mullioned and transomed. And I think Philip and I were able to come to a fairly strong consensus on, with at the very least the windows. I think I'm more confident in the windows on the towers in this drawing than I am the windows on the actual block of the castle itself. And that's simply because they exist in a better form today. We can look at what's still there. We know that there would have been those 2 iron bars that would have continued through each of those windows. I think there's evidence for them on 5 of the surviving 12 windows, and one of them that actually has it in presence, the one I showed on top and bottom. So we know we would have had those iron bars, as well as likely timber shutters that would have attached to them that you likely would have just tied with a bit of rope to keep the shutters closed. And then the windows on the main block itself, there's no sill stones still surviving. There's no lentil stones. There's no jambs. There's no nothing that are kind of surviving today. So even whether or not they're timber or stone is a matter of conjecture. But based on other buildings of the type, it's very likely they would have been stone, and they would have been at the very least mullioned, if not transomed. But just because they're smaller on the front, I'd say it's more likely that we simply have a mullion on the front and possibly mullions and transoms on the back.
Sorry, yeah. Go ahead,
Brilliant.
Siobhan.
Thanks. Frank.
Great. Thanks very much. Thanks very much, Frank. That's absolutely brilliant. Just I haven't seen it all presented in the way that you have. Obviously, a huge amount of research, a lot of kind of map regression, historical research, and brilliant to do the LiDAR and the DTM. And that drawing is incredible. You know, it really just brings the project to life. Really,
it really does.
You
really
know,
does.
Yeah.
Many thanks to Philip for his patience with us as we work through it there.
Great. And I suppose I just have 2 questions. One thing is I'm just wondering in terms of Valentine's Church,
Yes.
did you look at it contemporaneously with the just your relationship, you know, because you've left it in there in the drawing, which obviously it's not the same date, but did you take a little look at that as well while you were doing the work on Nolan's Castle? And my second question then, I suppose, might be more towards Angela, but where do you plan to go with this in 2024?
Well, I exactly right. I'll let Angela handle the second part of that. But the first bit with regard to Valentine's Church there, I think one of the key bits is that we know that there's at least 2 churches present on the site, and we know that the second one is actually built likely after this castle is taken over it goes into the ownership of Francis Gore. So I think it's the late 1600s. I only looked a little bit at the historical background on the church itself. There's really kind of few historical references of the church at all. In regard to the castle, at least. Any sort of reference we have to it is very much in isolation and more in keeping with the town as opposed to the castle itself. So my focus was very much on the castle, but we wanted to keep it in the drawing. I know it was a discussion point between Michael Breen and Patty, as well as Angela and Philip and myself, that just to kind of make sure it was in keeping with the surrounding landscape of the monuments that are still surrounding the building itself. You can also see on the top right there, you can actually see the megalithic tombs present in the drawing as well. So just that idea that we wanted to include as much of the surrounding landscape as well, because as important of a monument as Enniscrone Castle is, and it is very much the focus of the drawing, it wouldn't be there if it wasn't for the surrounding landscape that it was a part of. So looking at and including all of those other aspects, even if in just a smaller bit of detail, I think everything was important to make sure we included as much as possible there. And I'll leave the second half of that to Angela there in terms of
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Frank.
No problem.
Hi, Siobhan. I guess, yeah, we as a group, we'll have to sit down and discuss how we want to progress this for next year. I think Frank alluded there in his talk that, you know, there might be some benefit to geophysical survey So maybe that's something we could look at. I think even there's probably a little bit more processing that could be done even from the LiDAR data that was obtained this year. And we're also thinking, we're just so impressed with the imagery from this as well, and how we can use this as a tool to maybe engage people in the community who may not have had much interest, because it just kind of throws a whole new spotlight on it. I think having Frank's report, and hopefully we'll circulate that as widely as possible and put it up on the Discover Enniscrone website and put this image up, and just create as much awareness and knowledge about this, and maybe use it as a tool in the local schools. We're also having discussions, maybe we would where we could display this image in a prominent location in the village, whether that would be in a sort of a big poster or something just in a shop window, or a framed picture. We have arranged a framed picture which we're hoping to put into the Family Resource Centre. And yeah, we're even thinking about a mural if we can get permissions and all our things lined up. But yeah, we have lots of ideas we're going to kick around over the next few months. So it's just a case of sitting down now and see, could we put in another funding application for something next year. But we're just incredibly grateful to the Heritage Council and the Community Monuments Fund as well. There's hopes that will lead to actual conservation works and a long-term plan to create better access into the structure itself and better presentation. This could be used on signage at the castle down the line when we get to that point, which hopefully we'll still keep plugging away at the funding. And thanks to yourself and the Heritage Office for the support we've had on the Community Monuments Fund element of this. It's been brilliant. It's overall, like, the progress we've made in the last 2 or 3 years. I think everybody in the committee has been really, really happy with it. And Michael Breen and Paddy have been a great support, and Tommy Foodie as well. So yeah, overall we've ambitious plans.
That's great. Thanks very much, Angela, and no doubt we'll watch this space. And best of luck for planning for 2024. Thanks very much.
Thanks for everyone who's tuned in today. Thanks a million.
Thanks. Well, if that's anything for everybody else, if I think that's everybody finished there, then yeah, no, there's nothing more to say than just thanks, Frank, for your time today, and Angela for that introduction, and thanks everybody for joining us today. And yeah, well, no, that was brilliant. So nothing more to say than just thanks to you all for coming, and we'll see you at the next one.